spaces in Chattanooga. We're going to have energy modeling and commissioning, talk about some things you need to know for energy modeling and commissioning. And also one thing I want to point out is we have sponsors today for this event. In the back, we have Mr. Tom Baker and Candace Sharp. They are representatives from Stone Peak and Winco. I believe they make tile and more of the products. But they have provided today's lunch. So everybody, make sure you thank them if you can. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Mr. Mark Heinzer and Sarah Weeks. Mark Heinzer is a Site Development Manager for the City of Chattanooga Land Development Office. He is a Project Manager for the City on the Runoff Reduction Standard Project. Mark has a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Toledo, Ohio. He is a professional civil engineer, currently registered in Ohio, Illinois, and Tennessee. He is a lead AP and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control with over 15 years of experience in infrastructure projects in Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Additionally, he has been with the City of Chattanooga since 2010. Sarah Weeks is a senior planner at the Chattanooga-Hamilton County Regional Planning Agency. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Public and Urban Affairs with a concentration in policy and planning, has worked as an associate planner in the Landscape Architecture Land Planning Division of the AES Consulting Engineers in Williamsburg, Virginia, and environmental technologies firm in Buffalo, New York. And in 2008, started as senior planner at the Regional Planning Agency, where she worked in the Comprehensive Planning Department. In 2012, she was transferred to the Community Design Group of the Regional Planning Agency and is currently responsible for implementation and urban community design work as part of the design planning team. So, mouthful. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Appreciate it.
Again, I'd like to thank the sponsors for providing lunch, Tom and Candace. We really appreciate that, and it's always good to have something here to get people in the seats, because as a city, we've got to reach out to the design community and the public at large to tell you guys what's going on ahead of time. So we roll out a new regulation that comes down to us. You guys aren't all surprised by that. We don't want to do things where we're just throwing out laws and ordinances and no one's ever heard about it before. So we're trying to do a great education effort here, and with places like Green Spaces allowing us to use their facility, USGBC to help coordinate the training here, and with the sponsors to get some refreshments and everything. It's a team effort. Really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to come here as well. So as James mentioned, my name is Mark Heinzer. I'm with the Land Development Office in the City of Chattanooga. And what our function is to basically issue permits for all land development and building development, anything like that. Anything regarding new or redevelopment comes through our office, and those designs are reviewed and approved through our office. And so what we're going to talk about today is going to affect how those designs get done. And I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about her.
I'm a senior planner at the Regional Planning Agency just down the road, and you all might know the agency more of just to go rezone property or get a subdivision started or something. But we do have a division called the Community Design Group, and we really work on outreach and implementation of one of the plans that we have that we've done, and then for years ago and more recently. And we also are trying to partner more with the city staff to assist in this outreach and keeping the bigger vision in mind and the community's bigger goals of those plans in mind.
So this is a little brief agenda about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about some new stormwater requirements that are coming up, how we're going to accomplish that transition to these new requirements, a little bit about what we're doing now and how it's different, and we'll talk about a couple projects that we're working on to try to test out this new approach to stormwater management. And that's kind of it in a nutshell, but we'll get into some more detail here. Basically, the city is required by the state. The state gives us a permit, and it says we've got to do certain things. We've got to improve our water quality, and tells us a little bit about how to do that. And in turn, we have to make our own regulations to the development community. So what we get comes down from the state, but what the state gets comes down from the feds. So really, what we're talking about today started at the federal level and is now trickled down to the local level. And so this is what we're working with. Basically, the biggest change that's going to happen for new and redevelopment in the city of Chattanooga is that the first inch of rainfall that falls on that site is going to have to be trapped on that site, and it cannot get off. It's not allowed to run off It's got to be infiltrated, evapotranspirated, or reused somehow through irrigation or flushing toilets or some other method.
That's post-construction.
Yeah, post-construction. So if you've got a site, you're going to design a new building or a new whatever is going on there, it's going to have to capture that first inch of rain. So if you can imagine an inch of rain on the floor of this building, and how do you keep it in here without letting it run off? Well, how big of a sponge are you going to need? You know, the natural landscape is the sponge, and that's what we've got to work with. It's going to be a large part of new development is how to maximize the infiltration capacity of the existing green spaces on our site, and how to maximize
Is that
the
inside site, no limitations, square footage?
There are some criteria that we're working on. If it's over a certain threshold of square footage, that it would apply. And we don't have that exact number, but probably it's going to be somewhere in the realm of, it'll start being required at 5,000 square feet of disturbed area, and it's likely the threshold. So if you've got a site where you're just doing an addition or something like that, it might not apply. But if you've got a site where you're doing parking and a building and grading and landscaping, it would apply. And also, it's going to apply only to the disturbed area. So if you've got a site with 5 acres and you're only disturbing 4, we're only looking at 4. We're assuming that the natural landscape that you didn't touch can happen.
And there's some incentives built into the permit itself from the state. So we'll get into those a bit more in the presentation.
So basically, this new 1-inch requirement is coming to us from the state, and we have to roll this out to the development community because it's required by our permit. We don't have a say in the matter. It's part of our permit that we have to comply with as well in order to stay in good graces with the state EPA. Also, of course, we know it's going to improve water quality. So if we can capture that first flush off of a parking lot or off of a outdoor storage area or something like that, we can infiltrate that. We're not getting those pollutants into the stream, so there's a definite benefit for water quality. Also, when you look at the volume of water that you're capturing, you can also reduce some flooding issues as well, because you're actually taking volume out of there. And that's a big key to this is volume management, not just water quality, but actual volume as well. So as the city's developed, there's obviously a lot of flooding issues and infrastructure capacity issues. And as we go forward, this volume approach to managing it will help hopefully alleviate some of those issues in certain areas. How much is 1 inch? Well, on a 1 acre site, if you could imagine 500 rain barrels on a 1 acre site, that's 1 inch of rain over that site. I mean, that is a lot of water to not let get off that site. And it's a pretty daunting task when you just look at it in that context. I mean, it's a big volume, but again, the natural landscape can also absorb a fair amount of volume as well. So we've got to figure out a way to maximize those opportunities. Some other things that the permit required is that we needed to basically do a top-down approach. I mean, we could simply just change our engineering requirements and say, okay, so instead of 3/4 of an inch, we'll make you do an inch and it's got to infiltrate, and here's some equations, go. But really, the permit wanted us to take a different approach. The permit wanted us to look at this from a top-down thing and align our codes and ordinances with the new requirements for stormwater. And Sarah's going to talk about that a little bit. We did a water quality scorecard exercise, which if you're not familiar with that, it's basically we looked at every department in the city, general services, citywide services, public works, sanitary sewers, and we looked at everything we did in those operations, and we determined how does this either promote or hinder green infrastructure and low impact design and things like that. And we also looked at all of our codes and ordinances, especially in zoning and subdivision regulations. And we require streets to be 26 feet wide. That's the minimum. Well, why do they have to be 26 feet wide? Can they be 24? Can we reduce some of this impervious area that we're mandating? Why do we need curb and gutter and pipes? Can we go back to maybe some modified swales and ditches along the side of the road to help that infiltration? Right now, we require these hardscape type features, and that's directly against what we're trying to do with water quality. So we needed to look at this, and we need to redesign our subdivision rules and our zoning codes and ordinances to go along with that. In order for the technical side of it, we actually had to create some design standards that professionals could use. Architects and engineers, give them the right tools to use to make these new calculations and to apply these new credits. And also we needed to incentivize the use of green infrastructure. So the permit says we should be incentivizing this, not just mandating it, but maybe give some incentive to it. So the city is looking at how we can do some incentives for this as well, whether it's grant programs, maybe some recognition programs, or some water quality fee credits that, currently every parcel of land has a water quality fee based on their impervious area. Well, if we can do some of this stuff, maybe we can reduce that. So we are looking at those opportunities as well. And that was all mandated by our permit. If we don't comply with our permit, there's a legal issue there. And also, if we don't comply, we're going to continue to have the problems we have with flooding and poor water quality now. We've got historic land uses in the city of Chattanooga that have rendered some of our streams, very, very dangerous. Citico Creek and Chattanooga Creek have high pollutant levels in certain areas that you can't use them anymore as natural resources. So
There's neighborhoods in those, right next to a lot of those water bodies, because as municipalities, as city, we're a little bit more compact than going out into the county where everything is a bit more spread out. And the city, it's just right next door. It's not that far away.
So maybe some of you have seen this kind of slide before. You probably know the concept. As we go from a forested or a vegetated site to a developed site, we've got a lot less water getting into the groundwater to recharge groundwater and recharge base flow and streams. So how do we continue to grow and prosper and develop land, but from a stormwater perspective, make that land still function like the picture on the left there? That's kind of the challenge, and that's kind of what we're hoping to try to get to. So we do need to be able to prosper as a city, but we also need to do it in a smart way.
This is where I come in a bit more. The Regional Planning Agency has been involved because we have historically worked with the city to create the climate action plan and the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan was adopted in January 2006 and the climate action plan adopted in February 2009. And the goals within those two plans in particular, which come from the city, from the people in the city, are directly in line with the goals of this mandate and goals for the city's water quality. So that has really assisted. It's just that we've never implemented most of them yet. So there's people that have been involved in looking at them and working towards implementation on a lot of those. But this really helps us push forward in the implementation of a lot of those goals. And those resources are available for our website if you all do want to look them up, or at the agency. And looking at the landscape codes, subdivision ordinances, zoning codes, when looking at those and looking at these new regulations, we found that there are conflicts. There are big picture conflicts, and then there's some small quick fixes we can do just to make sure that when the public has to do these new requirements, there's not big roadblocks that would be simple to resolve. So right now we're reviewing those little roadblocks and getting those cleaned up. It's mainly just creating more flexibility so that when someone's designing a site, they could design it with these best management practices in mind, and they wouldn't be required to do other things instead. And then the agency has really committed to, the Regional Planning Agency has really committed to working with water quality and working with the city to help introduce some of these short-term fixes, like looking at the natural resources through mapping and planning and education, and then working with other partners to introduce an impervious surface reduction program and low impact development program. And then the big thing really came from looking at our zoning and subdivision codes. When the consultants looked at the codes, they said, these are pretty outdated. And if you guys had ever looked at our codes, you would say roughly the same thing. They're very outdated. And the methodology behind our current codes doesn't even work and in sync with this new methodology. So with that in mind, we said, can we have that in writing? We need some sort of record of this. Because for us to make any next steps, to introduce a code overhaul for the city of Chattanooga, we need to know that that is a priority. That's a priority from this project. And so we have that, and we are currently researching other municipalities of similar size, demographics, to see what might be the best style of codes for Chattanooga. And that's just where we are right now. But in the next few years, there will be a comprehensive code overhaul for zoning and subdivision regulations. So that is kind of exciting and daunting, but it will be wonderful.
Currently, our regulations require that the first 3/4 of an inch of rain gets trapped for the first flush. But you're allowed to discharge that over time. Over 96 hours, you can let that volume of water go. Also, we have detention ponds. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with those, where we capture, if you develop a site, you've got more volume of water coming off that site. You're allowed to let that water out at the same rate it was in an undeveloped state, but you got to hold that difference in volume. So now, if you had 100,000 gallons when it was undeveloped, now you have 200,000 gallons. You got to have a big pond to hold that extra volume. And you're allowed to let it go at that same rate. The problem is, the streams aren't used to that same rate over an extended period of time. The stream banks aren't strong enough, resilient enough to handle that increased volume of water. The rate might not have changed, but it's like Chinese water torture for those stream banks. It's just incessant water, much longer than they're used to, and you get this undercutting, so you still get undercutting of stream banks, and all of that undercutting is sediment going downstream to someplace else and choking out habitats and creating water quality problems. So detention ponds, while they may have alleviated some flooding issues, possibly, they didn't really help us when it came down to water quality. And in some cases, they actually make flooding worse. If you've got an area with a lot of detention ponds and they're holding that water back, but then they all kind of are designed to hold it back for the same amount of time and then let it all go, you could actually get increased flooding issues. So there's a lot of problems with that. And again, the loss of the groundwater recharge from the site. You're not getting a whole lot of recharge when you just have a small footprint of the stream bed that's trying to handle that. So there's definitely issues with detention ponds, and with infiltrating this first inch of rain or whatever we do with that, it will actually make these detention ponds hopefully smaller, because that volume doesn't have to be accounted for in the pond anymore. So we'll go over that a little bit more in the coming slides here. So the old way, 3/4 of an inch, you're allowed to let it go. Peak rate control for the increased volume. It was good at the time back in the 1980s when they came up with it, but we're a little bit past the 80s, and I think we need to step it up a little bit and get a little bit more technology behind this. So and they take up a lot of real estate. I mean, you've got to put a pond in, and you're taking up either buildable space for either homes or retail space for businesses and things like that. So if we can find a way to reduce that size, we can actually get more bang for our buck on a development.
That's not very visually attractive.
Yeah, no one really
So, I mean, you're driving down the road, you need to stop at the grocery store. Oh, yay, there's a great big stormwater pond that's empty because we haven't had rain. Yeah, that's not going to be good for good, positive development right around it, so.
So where did the 1 inch come from? Well, the 1 inch is basically the 85th percentile storm for our area. We get approximately 52 inches of rain a year here in Chattanooga. And most of the storm events, 85 out of 100 are less than an inch or less. So most of the times it rains, it's less than an inch. Now, sure, we'll get 2 or 3 inch rains every now and then, but for the majority of those rains, we're getting just a little bit here and there, and a lot of that will be able to be captured. Also, the volume of the rainwater. So if we get 52 inches of rain a year, 26 inches of that is probably from a storm that was less than an inch. So we can actually capture 50% of the volume of our rain events and get those back into the ground and recharged. So that's where that 1 inch came from. It was basically the 85th percentile storm. Now the federal government, on their facilities that they're building now, whenever they build a new facility, they use a 95th percentile storm, which is a little bit, obviously a little bit higher of a rain event. Again, here's just another distribution chart of those rain events. So, 3 inches and plus, we only get a couple of those, so they don't really account for a whole lot of the volume of the rain. And as you go down, but 0.02 inches to 1 inch is the majority of our rain events. Now, this is the South Chickamauga Creek watershed. This includes like Hamilton Place and anything basically east of the ridge cut there. And this area, we've got this little guy, which is the South Chickamauga Creek crayfish. And these are the threatened species. So in this watershed, we're requiring 1.6 inches, which is our 95th percentile storm. So if there's a development or redevelopment going on, well, actually I take it back. There's a new greenfield development going in this watershed. You need to do 1.6 inch state on line capture. But if it's a redevelopment, it's still the 1 inch. So there is an incentive to do redevelopment out here because we're not requiring the 95th percentile storm. We're only going to be requiring the standard 85th percentile storm. And so this crayfish here is a threatened species, and we've been asked by TDEC to keep an eye on that habitat and to do some additional precautions in that watershed for that reason. So.
And in all of the watersheds, there's other incentives that I mentioned before that are built into the permit where you could get down to 50%, only required to do 50% of the CO volume.
Yeah.
Okay. And basically they're a lot of planning tools, which was my big sticker on the whole permit. And a redevelopment site is located near public transit. It gives, I think, a half a mile, and then it creates some sort of vertical density or vertical, development. And if it has a density of 7 units floor area per acre, or is it floor area ratio? No, it's 7 units per acre. Vertical density, 7 units per acre, near transit. If it's a brownfield, and if it's a redevelopment.
You get a 10% credit for each of those categories, up to 50%. So it could be on a development that's downtown in this urban core, you might end up with only a half inch stay on volume capture because you've got some other incentives to do that development. So we want redevelopment in the city areas that we've already got infrastructure in, so we're not filling up green space.
Right. And
we want it near transit and all those things. So.
These are all infrastructure pieces. I mean, transit is a form of infrastructure. So to try to incentivize and promote people to reuse these sites where you already have public investment, the state is really promoting that.
So how are we going to infiltrate this water? Obviously, these terms aren't new to you guys. Low impact development and green infrastructure. We've got to be smarter about our layouts of our sites. We've got to also incorporate some form of green infrastructure to act as the sponge that the land was using before. And so these are the things that we're going to see more and more of this, and it's basically one of the few ways to deal with this new mandate. Obviously, we've got some nice natural resources around here. We want to keep that. We want to remain one of the best towns ever. I think we barely beat out ancient Rome. So that's great. And, for that, that kind of recognition is great for our city, and we want to maintain that reputation. So green infrastructure does that in a lot of different ways, and obviously.
So in the combination with low impact design, it can really help save a lot of our areas that are sensitive lands that can help take care of the stormwater naturally, which would be really helpful, and to promote reusing property. So, and then it's been attracting a lot of new businesses in Chattanooga in itself, and that's one of the big things. We've got Trash Pad here, doing a new business. So I think a lot of these new businesses, a lot of people here come because of outdoor amenities, which is exciting.
So, we want to go from gray to green. We really do need to do this because pipes don't infiltrate water at all. And, storage tanks and detention ponds don't help us out too much. We really need to make things look better. And when they look better, they're going to function better too. So that's basically, we've got to make this shift, this paradigm shift from the current mentality to something that's going to be a little bit more sustainable in the future.
And I won't go into this with the fuzzy planner talk, but a lot of those other benefits that can come out of these tools are such wonderful benefits to help healthy communities, help prosperous neighborhoods. So that's another thing.
So the city, with help from our consultants, has put together a rainwater management guide. This is a design manual basically for the design community, for architects and engineers who are doing land development. This is basically going to kind of walk you through the new way of designing sites there's three main focuses for managing this first inch of rain: preservation and protection. So, as I mentioned before, if there's an area that you're not touching, you're not going to disturb a particular area of the site, well, you don't have to count that 1 inch on there. So that gives you already a credit on that site. You don't have to worry about that. And it also is an incentive not to disturb more than you need to, because the more you disturb, the more you have to deal with after the fact. And there's also restoration practices. If it's a redevelopment site and it's just an old parking lot that's been breaking up and just running off water all these years, well, if you convert some of that back into meadow or reforest a portion of it that you're not using, something like that, you get credit for that as well. And then, of course, there's the structural measures, which are things like pervious pavements, bioretention systems, green roofs, and things like that. So there are these different practices, and this design manual is about 600 pages long. It's basically a reference guide. You don't have to obviously know everything in the manual to use it, but it does walk you through how to design a site, and it gives you all the resources you need to do that. So we've looked at all the different information out there. We did research on bioretention systems and pervious pavements, and we condensed that down into one chapter for us. We've got a chapter on pervious pavement systems only that we did all our research, and we condensed everything that we learned right into one chapter, so you guys don't have to be searching around the internet to read that. And same with bioretention systems and green roofs and things like that. So there's a lot of information here. It's a big resource, but it also does tell you how to do the design. There's some examples in there. There's workflows in there, things like that. So this manual is available on our website right now for download. So if you wanted to go check it out, you can get on the city's water quality website under resource range. You can download this entire manual and look at it. There's some other things on there as well for you to download, some other tools. We'll get into that a little bit, but we're putting this out there now. These rules don't become effective until the end of 2014, so we've got actually a little over a year before we're going to be required to be doing this out in the development community. But we want to get this out there now. We want your feedback on this stuff so that when it does become law, everyone's kind of on the same page and we're all knowing what to expect from each other and stuff. So
That's another reason why we're doing a lot of presentations around town, is that we can spread the word about the manual. It's not finalized. Check it out. Give us feedback, please.
And so that manual will tell us how to manage this volume, how to apply the low impact development practices on a particular site, and also talks very good detail about what value do you get out of green space on your site, how much water does it actually absorb and take out, things like that. There's also spreadsheets to use, which I'll briefly show you those too. So there's all kinds of tools available on in this management guide to get us through this transition. There's also incentives and credits, and we have a current incentive and credit program for people to retrofit their sites or to install detention pond or things like that. But that whole existing incentive and credit program is going to go away when this becomes a law. So we've got to totally retool the incentives for green infrastructure and things like that. So right now, we're in the process right now of looking at all those incentives and credits that we had in the past and reworking them to fit the new requirements. And it's a process that we are doing with a group of just developers and architects and engineers. We get together once a month and we go over this stuff and we try to figure out what's going to be an incentive and what's not going to be an incentive. Is it an incentive for a developer or for the property owner? Because developers, they'll build land and then they'll sell it. So if there's no benefit to the developer, what is his incentive to do anything different on the site? So there's got to be a benefit and an incentive for the developer to do something, and there's also got to be a continued benefit and incentive for the landowner. Because if I buy a property, if there's a benefit, green infrastructure benefit that I don't get any credit from, it's not going to look any more attractive to me. So I want, as a landowner or a developer, I want credits and incentives for both of those situations. So we've got to figure out right now. We only have credits and incentives for landowners. There is no credit or incentive as a developer. So we're looking to make that difference so that we get these things put in up front and not thought of after the fact. And then, so now I want to talk about a project that the city is doing that we just let out for bid a couple weeks ago, and it's just right behind us here on Johnson Street. And as you can see, we got a little bit of a drainage issue out there. This is Lake Needlove, we like to call it. And so just about every time we get a decent amount of rain, we get a big issue back here. And this is a public right-of-way. You see, there's kind of hard to even tell where the edge of the road is. It's there, but it's not really well defined. We've got no drainage going on in that intersection, so to speak of. So it's a safety hazard. It's a health hazard. We knew we needed to do something. We've got a lot of development going on in this area, and so we started to look at what can we do now. The old way to deal with this was to put a catch basin in that corner and pipe it right to the sanitary sewer system, because this is in the combined sewer area. So all of this water, all this rainwater goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and then gets, if it's a big enough rain, it just gets flushed right out into the Tennessee River without treatment, which is not a good thing. So we had an opportunity here to do a couple of things. One, we needed to fix this public right-of-way for safety reasons. Two, we had an opportunity to deal with our sanitary sewer system. And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with that, but earlier this year, we were given a $250 million mandate by the court to make improvements to the sanitary sewer collection system to help alleviate these overflows that are caused by situations like this. So the city over the next 15 years is going to be spending $250 million on upgrades to sanitary sewer systems in the combined sewer area and throughout the collection system as well, because we do have infiltration and inflows from outside the combined sewer area to deal with. So $250 million is a lot of money, and we don't want to be treating rainwater to the same standard as we treat, sanitary sewer water. So it's very difficult to separate these systems, but what we can do, and what we're doing out here, is finding a way to trap some of this and infiltrate it before it even gets in there. So this is a pilot project that we're going to be starting, I think, next 2 weeks from now. We'll be breaking ground on this. And what we're doing here is...
let me also say that our sanitary sewer, combined sewer problem is happening to a lot of cities around the country. And it is typical for these mandates to trigger the action of the city. Like, I've been to conferences to learn about a lot of these since I'm not an engineer. It's interesting to see how many are happening right now. It seems as though these systems were all installed around the same time around the country. So a lot of these problems are hitting home right now, or just a few years ago, or will hit soon. So this is a lot of cities are coming across and having to solve a lot of these problems right now.
So right here at this intersection is where we have that big puddle that we saw. And what we're doing, we've got a drainage area here. It's a little bit over an acre and a half. We're going to be replacing the roadway surface with pervious pavers. And so that area there is where basically the project limits. So everything that's in gray there is going to be pervious pavement that will capture this first inch of rain and infiltrate that into the ground before it gets into this sewer system. And we've got some development out here. We've got the crash pad with our green roof, and we've got flying squirrel going on, and there's still some other real estate. There's someone's talking about developing this parcel here. So there's a lot of activity going on here, and obviously that roadway is in bad shape. So we needed to do something out there. And this became a public-private partnership, basically, with the Flying Squirrel. And what we did, they were going to have to do their standard water quality on their site. They're going to have to figure out where to put it. They're going to have to detain so much water and provide the water quality volume and put it on their site somewhere. And basically, we knew we were going to have to do some fixes in the roadway here. So it seemed like a good opportunity to do some sort of a public-private partnership on this, because we needed to do our end of it as the city maintenance side of it. And they needed to do their end of it. Well, maybe we can do something together. Maybe this is in the urban area, it's in the combined sewer area. Can we somehow work together on this? And so what we came up with a mutual agreement, a memorandum of understanding, where we would go ahead and rebuild the road like we normally do, but instead of just putting back in normal asphalt, the crash pad, the Flying Squirrel restaurant said, we'll donate pervious pavers to you. And if you'll just put them in, they'll look nicer and they'll function better. And we'll get our water quality, and you'll get, water quality for the rest of this area as well. So that was kind of how it went down. From our end, we designed the improvements. We basically provided all the resources from the subgrade up to where these guys came in and donated, I think, 14,000 square feet of pervious pavers for this project for us. So in that sense, we could actually get much more for our money as a city, and they're getting what they need from a water quality standpoint. And it looks like this is probably going to work out, hopefully, in everyone's benefit. And so this project was put out for bid, I think, in March, and we do have a contractor that's been contracted to go out, and I think July 8th they're going to start breaking ground out there to get this put in place. So this will be a good test method, I guess, for this new criteria. And I'm just going to breeze through a few of the spreadsheets. These are from, you can download these spreadsheets off our website. This kind of walks somebody through the design process of infiltration and how to get to these numbers. And it seems kind of silly. Well, 1 inch is pretty straightforward. I'll just capture 1 inch, but how much of that 1 inch does that tree over there use? You can subtract that. How much does this lawn area use? Well, does it use capture that whole inch, or does it capture half an inch? So there's all kinds of research and university level stuff as to how much water a tree needs, how much water different types of landscaping need. And so these factors are all built in here. So you can say I've got like 10 river birch over here, and so each of those take up 50 gallons of water per month or whatever it is. And so that's built in here. You can calculate that. And that all comes off that 1 inch. So if I'm a developer and I've got to put in landscaping to satisfy planning agency, well, now I also get stormwater credit for that landscaping. Now I know, well, I've got to put in this tree in my parking lot because I got to have a tree at least no less than 60 feet away from every parking space. So, well, now I'm also getting credit for that tree from stormwater perspective. So,
but thinking about them in multi-purpose spaces, especially in an urban area like downtown, right down here, you really want to utilize every square inch to the best of your ability, so you can really build out the parcel, so you can also get a return on your investment. There's all of these things to think about. So getting double bang to meet the requirements is a really win-win situation.
Well, it sounds like everyone thinks, oh, we're going from 1 inch or from a 3/4 inch requirement to a 1 inch requirement. Yes, we are, but you weren't getting credit for that tree before, but now you are getting credit for the tree, so that's good. And the other side of it is you weren't getting credit for any infiltration. So now, if I look at my design, and I've got, as you can see on here, I've got my capture volume is 11,000 cubic feet. That's how much I'm capturing and infiltrating into the ground out here. So that number comes off my runoff number for the peak rain control for my detention pond side. So if I don't need one here, but if I did need a detention pond, that number gets subtracted from it. Right now, you get no credit for any kind of infiltration that might happen on your site. So yeah, we're going from 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch, but we're also adding all these credits into there. So it's really, I really don't think it's going to be too much more difficult from a technical perspective to do this, but it is a transition from a design perspective. And so the other thing, this is where we get the credit for runoff. Right here, our runoff number 96. It's an impervious area. You have 96% of that water that falls on it runs off because it's basically hardscape. It's just going to run right off. But if I'm taking that and putting it through pervious pavement, now my runoff numbers get a lot less. And so basically, after I've done my improvements, after I've developed this, I actually have less runoff because I've captured more than I need to. So I don't even need a detention pond. If I'm developing something and I can cut back and I can get less lower runoff number, I don't need a detention pond. I can go put homes there, or I can do something else with that property or that portion of the property because I've captured more than I need to on this other side of it. So there's some ways to actually get some benefit out of doing this. And these spreadsheets are available. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the spreadsheets, but they are available. They do use what's called the small storm hydrology method, which is a rainfall method to developed by Dr. Pitt from University of Alabama, and there's a lot of literature out there on that as well. And that's how we calculate what's getting taken up by all the different landscaping features out there. So what is this going to cost? That's a good question. Gilbert knows. So basically, every site's different. We really don't know. Every site's going to have its own challenges, its own opportunities. We're going to have to look at every site and find what's going to work best. Some sites might be great for, bioretention, but maybe the soils aren't so good that it's not going to work. Or maybe pervious pavement might be the way to go, but if it's a trucking facility or a transfer facility, you don't want pervious pavement out there necessarily because they'll just chew it right up. So what other things can you do out there? So every site's going to have its own opportunities and challenges and costs associated with it. Downtown, the only option might be a green roof.
Or you could do a combination of quite a few of them. And like in a subdivision, I can see that there's so much opportunity just to do a combination of quite a few.
And just to give a little example, I mean, you guys have probably seen examples like this before, where there's a typical residential subdivision design, and of course you'd be required to do the full 1 inch over this whole area because you're disturbing the entire area. Over here, you only have to capture 1 inch on the area you're disturbing, so you've got all this area that you don't have to worry about. Plus, you've got less infrastructure costs because you don't have as much roadway, you don't have as much piping or any. You have the same number of lots, actually. I don't think it's 170 lots or whatever. You have the same number of lots. They're just smaller on this other conservation design. And because of the cost of infrastructure, it's actually less. Now, it's a different product. You might be marketing this to a different clientele, but you can do the development in this way and actually save money in the process.
And more open space.
And more open space is obviously a selling point for those lots. Here's another quick little thing I found on the EPA's website where they were looking at a traditional design over here for their new office park, and they had a large detention pond there. And they actually let it out for bid, and it was ready to go, and they were going to build it. And I think the contractor said, hey, we can do this cheaper this way. So they kind of redesigned it with some low-impact development features on it, pervious pavement, things like that. And they ended up saving almost 20% on the construction cost. So this was a site that looked, it didn't suffer because of the way it looked. I mean, it wasn't like you were making it smaller or anything like that. It was actually the same exact footprint, just done differently. And they ended up saving some money. So there are opportunities. There are some financial advantages or some financial opportunities to do this. And as I kind of mentioned, we start this in 2014. I think it has to be in effect by December of 2014, but it's going to roll out everywhere in the state over the coming years. Hamilton County is right behind us, 6 months behind us. They have to do this 1 inch capture as well. So it won't be like Chattanooga's not a good place to develop because they have a 1 inch requirement. Well, Hamilton County is going to have a 1 inch requirement. And then it's going to spread to the other counties around us. So Bradley County is going to have it. It's going to be across the state at some point. Now the TDEC says we have to have this 1 inch, but they don't tell us how to come to that. We decided to use a small storm hydrology method. Nashville has a different method. They have a 1 inch requirement coming up too, and they have a different method to calculate this stuff. Atlanta now has a requirement for every single family home that goes in Atlanta has to capture that 1st inch as well. And I think they're basically saying, you have to put in a rain garden on every single family home. That just came about in February. They put that out. So they've got a presentation on the Atlanta Water Quality website that you can download and view about what they're doing down in Atlanta to accommodate this. So this is going to be the law of the land and not in the not too distant future. But we are first in Tennessee. Lucky us. We have to figure out how to do this some way. So that's kind of where we're at. And that's pretty much it. Well, the one thing I want to say is we are looking for some local projects or pilot projects. If you know a developer, if you know a project that might be interested in trying it out, and there might be some financial incentives to do that. We can talk to that developer about that. Obviously, we will help the designer through the process. We'll walk through the process with the designer, and so you won't be kind of left out on your own to try to design something like this. So we're looking for a few projects that we can test this out on. We did, like I said, we did the Johnson Street project, which is an internal project that we're trying it out on. We've got another project coming up on Anderson Avenue that we're going to be doing in the coming probably next 12 to 18 months. Same type of thing. But we also want some commercial and some residential projects to come to us and say, hey, I'm willing to try this if you're willing to help. And we can hopefully do that. So if you do know of any opportunities, any developers or projects out there that you can steer our way, we'd be happy to work with them on it. And as I said, there might be some financial advantage. I don't know what it's going to be, but we're looking to hopefully provide some financial incentive to do that. And you know, I've kind of been talking about this whole volume thing. Well, what happens if you've got a brownfield site you don't want to infiltrate? Or what happens if you're on bedrock and you can't infiltrate? Or you got a high groundwater table? Or for a number of reasons you got a really tight clay soil that you can't infiltrate in the time. Basically, the rule says you have to infiltrate that 1 inch over 72 hours. So if you don't have any kind of percolation in the soil, or you've got reasons you don't want to percolate, what are your options? Is that land undevelopable? Well, no, it's not. We've got a caveat here. If you've got a hardship in that regard, you can look to doing a practice that will remove 80% of the TSS, total suspended solids, from that runoff. But it doesn't. It's not an inch anymore. Now it bumps up to 2.1 inches because based on the 80% of the total suspended solids is basically taken by the first 2 inches of rain. So it's a little different. It's a stricter criteria for the 80%, but you can use some manufactured devices to do that, hydrodynamic separators or some other means. And you can also calculate percent removals from things like bioretention areas. Maybe your bioretention area can only handle half an inch, but you can get 80% for the remainder of the required volume through the natural processes of that. Well, now you can start kind of mixing and matching 80% versus the infiltration. And as long as you're getting all that, it'll work out. So there is some relief from the infiltration, but it does require you to do a little bit more volume than just the first inch. So every site, I mean, most sites are still going to be developable. It'll just be a matter of how you do it. So that's kind of, I just want to throw that out there. I'm just talking about that when I wanted to in here, but that is an option. So we still can use hydrodynamic separators and manufactured things to achieve our water quality requirements, but they might need to be a little bit bigger than just managing the first inch, they'll have to manage 2 inches. And everything I've talked about is pretty much laid out in the manual. So the first 3 chapters talk about everything I've pretty much said here. So if you download the manual on our website, you can get in there and you can see everything I'm talking about. It'll walk you through. There's some examples in the appendices to walk you through the design of the site, things like that. So I encourage you to get on there. And if you have any questions or anything, just anytime, just give us a call or shoot us an email. This is kind of our timeline as to what we're doing. Right now, we're kind of here. We're doing our code overhauls and some code updates here. And in December 1st, 2014, these new rules will have to be effective. That's the deadline in our permit. So City Council will have to probably approve these ordinances somewhat before that. Maybe sometime in early November, these will actually become effective. But that's the deadline when we have to do that. And so that's kind of going forward. But that'll do it. Here's some contact information for people that are involved in this project. So you can contact anybody here at any time if you have any questions or comments or want to give any feedback to us. Encourage you to look at the manual and give it a test run, see what you think. Also, as I mentioned, we are in the middle of revising our incentive and credit program. If you want to be a part of that revision team, you're welcome to. Let us know. We'll get your name on the list, and you can provide some input before it actually goes out. So
we need to make this Chattanooga oriented. I mean, we need to know what's going to work, not going to work here, and the interaction with those in the field and on the ground and doing the designs is one of the only ways we can really feel that out.
So that's it. That's the end of the presentation. If you guys have any questions.
Can I say one thing before we take questions? Everybody should have gotten a course evaluation for today. If y'all could fill that out and leave it on the front sign-in table on your way out. And do make sure that you get a certificate for today's event as well. I have some extras up front. So we have about 10 minutes, so 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll hear from our sponsors at the end.
Thanks again for everyone for coming. Really appreciate your involvement and your willingness to listen to my boring engineering speech here. But it's going to affect all of us. So we do want you guys to be aware of it, and we want to do this in partnership with the development community, and not just as a mandate from the city. So we definitely want your feedback. We want to hear from you guys, and we want to make this work to everybody's benefit.
If you have anyone else who'd like us to speak to, please let me know. Contact me and I'll help coordinate and set that up.
Yes.
What do you see as your biggest challenge in actually implementing that? What kind of, I guess, I'll say, like there was negative feedback or detractors that you're hearing from so far?
All kinds. The biggest one is the soils around here. Can't infiltrate Chattanooga. There's too much clay. The infiltration rates of the soils around here. Everyone's worried about the clay content of the soils and how it's just too tight to infiltrate that water. So that's the biggest concern we have heard from developers. Also from just a logistical implementation standpoint, this process doesn't really fit well with our current processes of the city for design and review of sites that come in. So we have to redo kind of how we look at everything too. So we're undergoing internal restructuring to try to make this smooth transition as well, because it's not something that we're used to doing either. So there's a it's going to be tougher for the development community, and it's also a challenge for us because we're not geared up to do this either. So those logistical issues are out there as well. From a technical standpoint, the soils are the biggest common denominator.
Yeah, and I hear you say tougher. Does that translate into more costs?
Good. It just depends.
We understand that every site is different. You got all these possible treatment train combinations you can do, all different ways to approach it, all different kinds of incentives. But it seems like you gave a positive spin, I wouldn't say spin, positive approach to the development. In other words, conventional development, hypothetically, you had 150 lots, okay? And then on the other, let's say the LID design, you had 150 lots. Yeah, but they're small.
Yeah, they're different.
Okay?
It's different. It's a different product.
Okay, it's a different product, but it's a different product. So is there going to be a premium paid for this different product to be able to have the green space? You're going to have to put a lot more work up front into the design aspects. So your designers, engineers, architects, what have you, are going to work harder, they're going to charge more, and that's just going to be your hassle down the line. So I guess that comes back to economic development.
Somebody has to maintain that green space too.
Exactly. That's a huge issue. Exactly. It's the maintenance aspect of that. So the LID sounds great on paper, sure, but the implementation of that will be enormous in terms of cost. So
There's going
how's that?
to be a transition period, as in any new kinds of requirements that come across Chattanooga and other municipalities. And with the LID development, I've seen it in tons of other municipalities, and a lot of them approach it with golf course, other means in which to utilize and activate that space and utilize it so that it is a return on investment for open space. It's getting creative with these measures, and also looking at the design. I mean, that conservation design is not going to be best everywhere, and it's not going to be best for everyone's price point. So it's getting really
You're making everybody good.
I'm sorry?
It's not good for everybody's platform, but you're making everybody good.
No, but there's a lot of different tools in the manual and per the mandate to utilize to be able to achieve the requirements. It is a matter of combining those tools in a way to meet the numbers. And for subdivision design in particular, if you want a larger lots, if you want different combination of things, it's just a matter of putting the tools together to create what you need. And I think there's going to be a transition period
Change
so that, designers can figure out a new way to combine these things to do it. But we're always going through transition periods in every industry, and Chattanooga keeps doing better and thriving. And that's another reason why we really need input on these incentives and credits for things like design patterns and development patterns, and looking at certain maybe developments you're doing right now. How can you incorporate them? How can you work with the city, work with us, work with our design teams to see how we've got a new landscape architect on staff at the Regional Planning Agency. I mean, we've got people who really want to help work with the community and make sure it works in Chattanooga, to make sure we can make that transition as smooth as possible. Because there's going to be a transition. We're well aware of that. That's why we've been working this for 2 or 3 years. But we need to make it Chattanooga. We need to make it function well here. We need to make the economics work here. We need to make, the development community continue to be able to create products that are really good for our city. So I agree. There's a big question mark. So I think involvement from the industries is going to be key in the incentives and credits, especially.
Yes.
This approach is going to help with stormwater going forward, but what about the existing stormwater and all the hard surfaces downtown? Is Chattanooga still faced with having to go in and put in a separate stormwater system to handle that, or?
Well, separating those existing, or those historic combined sewer areas is financially just unachievable. There's so much cost in the downtown urban area to do that really what we have to do is look at how can we just minimize the impact of those areas. And so retrofitting is going to be a big part of our incentives and credits. If there's a development or redevelopment in the downtown area or in the combined sewer area, we're going to incentivize that as best we can, because that's where we're going to get our benefit in those types of areas.
I'm glad to hear that, because I remember William McDonough, the world famous sustainable architect, visited the city many years ago, and he encouraged your leadership at that time to put the money above ground and making these kinds of improvements like we saw today versus digging up streets and putting in separate pipes for stormwater. So
We want to be able to do those types of things as opposed to the old way. Figure out how we do this stuff, capture the water where it falls as opposed to funneling it somewhere really quickly like we used to do. There's going to be incentive for that.
I wanted to retouch on my response mark too. I don't want to imply that by any means we design projects for people. For a second there, I was like, wait, we made it sound like we design it for you. We don't. We just help introduce the codes and talk to you about codes and stuff.
I showed an example of conservation design in residential development where everything was kind of like that. That's not, we're not saying you have to do that. We're just saying that's one way to achieve a 1-inch capture. And there's other ways to do it too. You can do it however you want. The result is what we're looking for. It's a performance-based approach to this, is that if your site, however you develop it, can achieve this performance, then you've met the criteria. You're good to go. And then, whether we like it or not, that's what we have to give. That's what we have to work with. The state has given us that mandate. It's going to be, of course, rolled out to Hamilton County and the rest of the state. Probably the rest of the country at some point, because it didn't come down from the federal level. So if we're all on the same playing field, it might cost more, but it's going to cost more for everybody. And until right now, pervious pavement, it's a premium to buy. Bioretention soil media, it's a premium to buy because there's no market for it. There's a small market for it. But when everyone has to do it, that market's going to explode, and economies of scale will hopefully bring it down to where, we don't need to get it. We can get it here, instead of just maybe 1 or 2 sources. Now we've got 10 or 12, and we can get a better price. So hopefully the economies of scale will help out with some of these different practices that we're going to have to implement. And we'll see those prices. They might ramp up a little bit at first, but they're going to level off and hopefully we'll still have a level playing field where everybody's working under the same rules and the same requirements. So we've got this mandate, and what we're trying to do is make it as painless as we can for everybody. That's why we're here talking to you. So we definitely know it's going to be a little bit of a painful transition because people aren't used to doing this. And we're not used to doing it either, honestly. So we don't know what to expect, but we want to make sure that we all are on the same page going forward.
So Mark and Sarah, that's about all the time we have for questions. So if anybody has any more questions for the presenters, please save them for after our presentation from our sponsors.